Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Code and Pixels podcast. My name is Kelly, and I'm once again joined by my amazing co-host, Adekunle. Today, we'll be chatting with Danny Banks about Style Dictionary.
Thanks, Kelly. Danny Banks is a principal design technologist at AWS. Hey, Danny. Thanks for being on the show. How are things going?
Hey, thanks for having me on the show. Things are going pretty great. Pretty interesting time to talk to me as well. I'm currently at AWS, but only for one more day. Next week, I will be starting at Snowflake. I'm very excited to work with a bunch of amazing people there. So I'm kind of right now transitioning between jobs. So it's an interesting time for me, but I can't complain. Everything is going great.
Love that. Hopefully, they don't give you too much work to do for your last couple of days.
I've actually given myself a lot more work to do. I'm stressing out about having unfinished work. Like I've been working late this week to try to get everything ready for my departure. But that's mostly just myself putting that on me and not externally.
I love that. Danny, you're the true MVP. Cool. Let's get started. So, can you kind of describe your career path from your first job to where you're at right now?
Yes. It's, I mean, if I go all the way back to my first job, which was at Knott's Berry Farm, but my first tech job, I actually started just as a intern while I was still in college at a small web design development agency. This was back before UX designer was even a role. So I was just a web designer, but I loved coding as well. And so I was also kind of like the front end web developer as well as web designer. So I was kind of both designed and coded at the same time. And then from there, I went to a startup called Spokio that I kind of did something similar. I always kind of had the design job title, but I always kind of straddled the line between design and engineering. And so I kind of was committing to the code base as well as kind of designing. So both in developer stand-ups and designer critiques and stuff like that. And again, this was kind of before that was even a role. And then eventually in 2014, I came to Amazon. Again, I was just hired as a UX designer. And this again was kind of before the design technologist or design engineer role had really come about. Eventually, after a few years, I kind of saw this design technology role coming out of Amazon or people in the Amazon company having that title. And I kind of looked at it, started talking to the people that's actually what I do. And so I talked to my manager and we did what's known as a lateral transfer, which is basically you keep the same level. And then you just kind of move your job family. So instead of UX designer, I became a design technologist. And that move was kind of easy at the time because design technologist at Amazon wasn't classified as a tech job family. So it didn't have the SDE engineer qualifications in terms of when you get promoted, you need to do tech assessment and stuff like that. But anyways, and then I moved to design technologist, and then I kind of became principal design technologist at some point. So I've kind of always just designed and coded at the same time. And I've always also been the only design technologist on the team or organization, which is different than what some other people have had. And I think the main thing for me is kind of I've always had to define what I do in the organization and in the team and kind of choose where I can best apply myself. And sometimes, it's doing more coding. Sometimes it's doing more I've done a lot of PM work as well. So sometimes it's doing more product-y stuff, but for things that developers use. So I think that's kind of in my career, that's always been the biggest or most important thing for my career. My role is defining what I do at any given team or organization, because it's not as well defined as just SDE. You write code, obviously code's going to be different in different organizations, but that's what you do. And there's very kind of structured hierarchy and organizational boundaries around kind of what designers, developers, PMs do, but design technologist doesn't really fit in those structures.
I love how you talk about defining the role. It sounds very empowering, and you get to kind of invent your role in a sense. Are you staying in the same type of role at Snowflake?
Yes, it's called slightly differently, but it's principal design engineer thing. Some companies call it design engineer, some call it design technologist. I also don't know which I prefer. Both make sense to me. But yeah, doing basically the same thing. I'll be reporting into the design org. And so I'll be working alongside the design team, working very closely with the engineering side as well as it's been kind of told to me, kind of as I was like talking to people at Snowflake, like I'd be helping. I don't like to use the phrase like bridge the gap, but kind of bringing the engineering and design sides closer together and kind of being that facilitator, being that kind of middle person in between the teams to kind of speak both languages across both teams and stuff like that. But
Can you talk a bit more specifically, like what does a typical day look like? Can you give some examples of what you would be doing supporting these teams?
yeah, I can give an example of like a typical day that I would imagine kind of I will have at Snowflake. A typical day that I have currently, which different things, and there's kind of at like working with design technologists at Amazon, and like I've mentored some and worked with design technologists throughout the company and stuff like that. There's kind of like almost two sides of like the design technology or design engineer role that I see. One is kind of like what I was kind of talking about with Snowflake, is like closing that gap between design and engineering. So writing some strength of the front end code, like CSS, design tokens, semantic HTML, styling UI code, while also kind of working with designers to kind of both help them understand what is or isn't possible with code, but also like in some cases designing some things like designing components, like working on a design system, designing some component, also implementing them, working with designers to kind of help them basically be like an engineer for designers or being a designer for engineers is like one of my classes kind of quit one time. And so it's kind of like how I imagine like what I will be doing at Snowflake is kind of both working with designers, kind of being a design person, both working with engineers, trying to up level both crafts in where they kind of meet together because, at the end of the day, users will interact with the code that is shipped. And so we want to kind of up level both the quality of that, but also the quality of design that gets shipped to them. And so kind of, helping both sides up level their craft where in the middle. What I've been doing recently at AWS is looks slightly different because I've been kind of working on developer tools and developer tooling. So I kind of have been at certain times being like a product manager, like defining what the developer tool or framework or component should be, or kind of like the use cases for it, and kind of working with managers and stuff like that, working across different organizations, sometimes designing the actual component or thing that's shipped, sometimes writing a bunch of the code. So like I kind of do a lot of things that aren't in the kind of traditional like design engineer role that you would have in a like design system team, for example. So it's more just like someone who knows design and engineering and product doing lots of stuff at the same time.
Yeah, I was gonna say I love you mentioned where you kind of uploading both design and engineering because I think that's kind of the part of the bridging the gap. Um, Also, side question: are you working with Jack McCord? We interviewed him in my class 2 years ago, but just wondering.
Yes, and he's actually one of the people that I talked to kind of get me over to Snowflake. So I'll be working with him. I'll be working with Jenny, who don't know if she's come on the podcast, but she's also kind of known in the design systems community. And then there's also a bunch of ex-Atlassian folks that are there as well. So that's honestly one of the reasons. Oh, and also Andrew Lasowski. I'm really excited to kind of go work with a bunch of people that I've had experiences with like throughout the community and just kind of know the people and stuff like that that are already there. So it's a really great team. A lot of really talented people there. So I'm very excited to work with all of them.
Nice. Seems like the design system world is it's small. Next question is, you've been the top contributor to Style Dictionary, which is probably one of the foundational tools for design systems in general around tokens. I'm wondering, like, how did that happen, and how did you kind of get started into kind of being top contributor for that tool?
That's a good question. Well, that Style Dictionary was actually kind of like my baby that I built Amazon. So this is back in 2015, 2016. I was working on the Amazon Seller mobile app that third-party sellers use to list products and sell stuff on Amazon. And we had kind of a somewhat traditional like Android iOS web app. There were some web views in the native application. Changing a font color, just changing anything required, like, and we also had things split across different packages. The package management system in Amazon, it's proprietary and was difficult to kind of basically make changes that would kind of go out synchronously, like at the same time. Like just to change, a font color, you make some changes in Objective-C code, Android resource XML files. Yeah, everyone's kind of heard the story now with design tokens, but it was still kind of a new problem at that time. And so I went to my manager at the time, who was kind of like the director of the team, and I said, like, hey, I see this problem, like, I want to kind of fix it, but do it in a way that other teams, like there's other people that have the same problem that they could benefit. Initially, I built it as inner source. So basically anyone at Amazon, so Amazon, also has Twitch and Whole Foods and Amazon Retail and AWS, like big company with lots of organizations. So building it as kind of like a package that other teams within Amazon could use, but it was still kind of closed source code. And as I was kind of like talking at internal Amazon conferences and kind of tipping around this idea, someone from the retail org was like, I really like this idea. I think this should be open source. I want to help you kind of make it open source. And so me and him partnered. His name is Charles Dorner. He's also one of the top contributors. And we kind of went through the process of open sourcing it through Amazon, which actually turned out to be a really nice process. Like, we had legal look at the IP and make sure we weren't giving away any secret sauce of Amazon and stuff like that. And so we open sourced it, I believe, in 2017 or 2016. And then I just kind of kept on improving it, adding small features, engaging in the community, like giving talks, now giving public talks, now that it was public. And yeah, that's kind of, that's, I guess, the story of Style Dictionary.
That's really impressive that you made it open source in that amount of time. As someone who works on an open source library, that's
Yes.
impressive.
Yeah,
No,
I think that kind of gets back to like defining my role as like, I was able to, luckily I had a great team and a great manager, really enjoyed it, where he's very encouraging and very like, okay with like, he on this open source thing there. Obviously didn't give any direct benefit, especially to our team specifically. Like, I mean, yes, we were improving the code that we were using and stuff like that, but it was definitely not an easy like business decision to make when I could be designing features for the seller mobile app that sellers use to sell stuff on Amazon, to give Amazon revenue. But yeah, my team and my manager at the time were very open to kind of be working on that, and I did find ways of like working on it alongside working on other stuff that I had to do. So like being able to build features in the Style Dictionary that I could build as part of a project that I was doing for the Amazon Prime mobile app, and so trying to find ways to make it more approachable and more amenable to kind of working on it while I did my quote unquote day job.
I think that's key, having that support system in place and just to kind of have those advocates. And I'm a contributor to Style
Yes, you
Dictionary.
are.
Thank you for creating something that was easy to contribute. So speaking of contributions, since it's open source, I was curious, how do you prioritize features? Do you rely on like the community? Do you have do you, do you have a dedicated roadmap? How does that kind of work together?
We rely really heavily on the community. So like what the community is choosing it for and kind of like where it's going and kind of the problems that the community is having. And then we also kind of have some guiding principles or kind of like tenets or whatever you want to call them for the project itself. Actually, I don't know like where they are anymore. It's been a while, but like kind of one of the things that like my initial idea in kind of building Style Dictionary is like I really wanted it to be like a foundational level piece of technology where we didn't like impose any particular structures on how to use it or as little as possible. So like, being as low level as possible. So we didn't want to say like, okay, this is how you have to structure your design tokens. This is how design tokens should get turned into CSS or any other plugin. We had a base set of like, transforms and Style Dictionary formats to kind of transform the token and format them as specific file formats, but you could use none of those. You write all of the things completely your own if you wanted to. Like we didn't want to impose any restrictions or any like structure into kind of how you use the technology basically. And so using that as like a guiding principle into kind of the features that we build. So like making sure that we're not like everything that we build doesn't restrict people and how they use it. So like we wouldn't build something that's like, okay, if you use this, you have to structure your token files in a certain way just to use it or something like that. So it's been kind of like a guiding principle and kind of how we prioritize features. And then just as the community has kind of used it, we've seen like these patterns or like cow paths emerge. And most recently, kind of Token Studio has been a very heavy, well, their users have been very heavy users of it, and they use it very heavily in kind of the Token Studio flow. And one of like the most recent major version, there was a lot of performance issues with just how internally we were storing the token data and transforming it and stuff like that. Did it in a kind of not super efficient way. And so one of the developers at Token Studio, Joran, kind of came on as like a co-contributor and really went through like the performance of it and increased the performance like by 10, 100. Like there are like, we actually have like test cases now where they just wouldn't even run on laptops because they'd be like 10,000 tokens with like 300 levels deep of like references that would just completely choke a computer. And now they actually run in 10 seconds or something like that. So that's been really awesome to kind of like, I had never thought that performance would ever be an issue, but as it got more popular, that eventually became an issue and we needed to actually solve that. So I'm very grateful that we had John kind of help and contribute in the way that he has.
Yeah, I love the idea where you created something and then someone else came and made some updates and made it 100 times better. I think that's the kind of the power of open source. Thanks for sharing that. To kind of switch topics to more of like general tooling, I feel like every day there's another tool, another design tool, dev tool. What trend do you think is overrated? And also, like, do you have anything that's like underrated? Again, this is open question. There's so many tools out here, but just wondering if you had any thoughts on this.
One thing that I've been kind of feeling more recently is like Next.js getting a bit overrated. React server components a bit overrated. might be a
Shots fired.
super.
Ooh.
That
We
might
might
be,
need a new episode for this.
yeah, that might be a super spicy take, but yeah, I've been kind of not been enjoying or kind of loving the trajectory that those things have taken. And so I recently rebuilt my own personal site because I was interviewing for jobs and stuff and needed to update it. And I rebuilt it in Astro, which that's going to be my I mean, maybe it's not underrated because everyone seems to love Astro, but I think it definitely doesn't give, I think it deserves more credit. I love just how it kind of structured building websites where it didn't kind of completely like you could opt into using React or Vue or whatever, but it wasn't like you didn't have to. But it still had the nice component model that you would get with like a React or Vue or whatever. But you're just running HTML and CSS, maybe a little JavaScript if you needed. And then if there was something that like, okay, you have like a piece of your site that's very complex and you need more complex state management and stuff like that, you could have just this one component that's React, and then it's scoped as one thing. And I just really like feels very refreshing to like be building websites or web applications with that in mind, where it's just HTML and CSS and JavaScript. When you need to go more complicated than that, you can. But like just getting back to kind of fundamentals for the web just feels very, very nice and refreshing to me. And I don't have to worry about like, hitting use client everywhere and all this type of stuff and like being kind of forced into like React Next.js way of like building things. So that's kind of like, I'll just recently the feelings that I've had in kind of building websites and kind of building for the web right now is I want to get more back to just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript and less of the kind of React Next.js patterns.
I also just want to give a shout out to Astro because we recently migrated our docs to Astro as well. And I think
Nice.
the thing that I liked the most was that things just worked. I didn't have to set up my own like routing stuff. Like it just worked. Adequately,
Yep.
have you used Astro?
I have. I've been on this like fatigue of frameworks lately because it was the same thing with Next.js where it was like, people say, oh, Next.js is fast, it's good, it's great. And I was like
Yeah.
using it and I'm like, okay, this is good. And they started adding more stuff and more stuff. And it's like,
Yeah.
and I was like, wait a minute. I'm building like a simple like website and I have to do all this like plumbing and whatnot. And I did use Astro for the first time last year on like a side project. And I liked it, but I'm like, it feels too good to be true. Because these tools come where it's like, it's great. And then money becomes involved. And then, it starts going, it just doesn't work well. So I like it, but I'm hesitant, if that makes
Mhm.
sense.
Yes, that does make sense. And I think I see what you're saying with like frameworks getting really popular, but needing some sort of financial backing. And then like a company comes in and then it changes the direction of the framework a little bit. So yeah, I don't have like a good like solution to open source and funding, sadly, but that is definitely like an issue. But right now, Astro is definitely awesome. The style dictionary site is built in Astro and Starlight. My personal site is built in Astro. I'm building a side project site in Astro right now, so I'm loving it.
Cool. I have one more question that's kind of out there, but there's so many things around AI. What do you think what is like the next wave of design tooling or design system tooling with AI? Because people think that it's going to take our jobs, or
Mhm.
some people think it's going to make our lives easier. I'm wondering what you think about it.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. Like I've worked with AI for a while. One of my last projects at AWS was the Amplify AI kit working on top of Amazon Bedrock. And so I've kind of worked with like a lot of the like foundational models and stuff like that and kind of frameworks on top of AI. So like for cells AI SDK and LangChain and all that type of stuff. And so I see like there's a there's a power there, but there's also like it's kind of like I think that it is overhyped, but it's not like yeah, it's gonna be shots fired again, but like it's not like the Web3 stuff that was like so much hype and there wasn't anything there. No offense to anyone, but like you know, so with like the AI stuff, like there is stuff, like, it is useful, and so I guess one of the things that I'll use a lot and I've been really enjoying is Goose from Block, which is an open source project, and it's both like a CLI, so you can kind of just open it in a directory if you're in the terminal and kind of interact with it. And so like I've used it for things of like I would either write a small like shell or bash script or a small just JavaScript node file that I would execute to like do something that would be repetitive that I wouldn't really want to write something to do. So like one example is like I got some SVG files from a designer that needed to be turned, or I got a Figma file from a designer that needed to be turned into SVGs in a specific way because then it was going to be turned into an icon font file because that's what it needed. And like I didn't want to like it's like 450 like SVG icons or whatever. I'm like I don't want to go through and like rename all of them or like small things. And so I just opened up and like, hey, can you just like rename all the SVG files, remove this, add that, like maybe go through and like make some conversions, do something, and it would just kind of go through and just do it all. And like that is a great use. Like it's a well-defined thing that made my life easier. I didn't want to go through and like write a script to do that or do that by hand myself. So I think that there's small areas where it can be really effective. I don't could be completely wrong. I don't think it's gonna be like one of those things where it's like I read out like the like chatbot or like text box where it's like, okay, design me a blank website with like blah 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 blah, and then like comes out with like an entirely built functional like web application website with like I don't think it's ever going to be good at those things, nor it could be like useful to do that. But I think for more scope down and kind of specific tasks, then I think it is kind of useful for those well-defined pieces. And I think for design systems specifically, like having not tree, but like having kind of a RAG pipeline with all of your design system documentation so you can ask natural language questions is a pretty low hanging fruit way of if your design system has tons of components and someone's new to the company and they just want to be like, hey, what should I use to make my design that has like X, Y, and Z, and like, oh, you should use this card component with this, button and this or whatever. It's good. I think a good way to kind of help onboarding. So it's not like fully taking over your job of like, here, design this feature for me. I'm just gonna sit back and like, just hit approve or whatever. But it still kind of helps. Like you're still kind of it's helping the educational process, and it's helping kind of really remove like those really small menial tasks. But it's not like fully replacing a designer or an engineer at this point. I've seen companies just be like, okay, I don't need engineers anymore. I'm just gonna use AI to write them like code. It gets to a certain point and they're like, there's like massive things that are breaking in my application and I don't know how to fix them. And then you need to bring someone on and they're like, this code is just unmanageable. And so like is ever just gonna like fully replace people at least? I don't know. Maybe it will one day. I don't know. But that was my long-winded way of my thoughts on AI. I can go for much longer.
When you were talking about converting all those icons, this is gonna date me, but I remember back in the day when we used Photoshop for UI. Saying that out loud makes me feel a little cringe. But this is for anyone listening. This is before Figma, before Sketch,
Before Sketch,
before Fireworks. If anyone used Fireworks, I remember when I used Photoshop Actions, and I remember that being a game changer because I had to convert multiple files to a different file type and do all the exports. And I remember feeling so cool about setting up Photoshop actions to like run through this batch of things I needed to do, and this all takes me back. I feel like this is him. Like this is familiar. This is something that I remember kind of having to like
Yeah.
walk through and tell it what to do. And now it's cool to see that that technology can expand to multiple things outside of just a single piece of software. But you kind of have to know like what you want, right? Like you have to know the
Yeah.
end state of what you're doing. And I feel like we're good at knowing, some of us are, some of us aren't. But generally speaking, humans, we know what we eventually want. So I find kind of some comfort in that. And I don't think a computer knows quite yet what we want ultimately at the end.
Yeah, and that's kind of like the blank text box problem is like, does anyone know with enough detail to say definitively exactly what entirety you want, such that an AI could actually build exactly what you have in your like. Once you get to that level of detail and kind of describing it, like you could just be writing most of that already. So yeah, like it's kind of a double-edged sword a little bit, but like again, it's also when you know exactly like this is I just want to do this exact thing. I don't know how to do it. It's like great for that. And I think with tools like Goose and stuff like that, they'll like show you like, okay, here's like the bash command that I'm gonna execute to like, look at all the files in the current directory. And then I'm gonna use this, scripts and kind of rename them. And so it's kind of a bit educational as well to like, oh, like this is how I would do it in the future. Or you could even at the end of it say like, hey, can you write me a bash script or a shell alias or something like that to do this in the future? And it could do like, so having that, so you're still kind of educating yourself and you're still learning. So it's not like you're just letting the computer just take all of your autonomy from you.
Yeah, that's when they take over. When they decide what should be the end result.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Yeah. So we have one final question for you, and it is: do you have anything you want to plug or anything you want to shout out besides Style Dictionary?
Yes, yeah, Style Dictionary. We are working on a new major version of Style Dictionary as well. 5, I believe we might have also just published it. So yeah, definitely check that out. Trying to think if there's anything else. I can't really think of anything right now. Astro, I've been loving Astro. Goose, again, been loving using Goose. Obviously, neither of those things have anything to do with like me, but I, credit where credit's due. I enjoy using those tools. Yeah, stuff like that.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Danny, for joining us today. We loved having you on the show. And I just want to say, have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
We want to thank you for tuning into this episode. For more content, feel free to explore our previous episodes on codeandpixels.fm. And don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter for updates on upcoming episodes. Also, feel free to connect with us on social media at Code and Pixels FM. Y'all have a great day.